is underway. Taken by Mogilny at center. He'll work it in off the boards into the Quebec zone. Going to the far side is Turgeon. Gets it back in now behind the net. They try to work it in front. The shot is scored! Mogilny! Mogilny on his first shift in the National Hockey League.
Shawn, the big reach. What a huge pirouette. And the big man scores. An incredible move. 6'9", and he's a ballerina. It's 2-0 Bruins. Wow.
Kane, a mishandle, came in front, a shot to save by Elliott. Rebound, and more! Duncan Keith after Elliott made the first save on Shawn. Keith found the carom, and it's 2-1 Chicago.
As here's Thornton. There it is! Number 400 for Joe Thornton, and the Sharks take the lead.
These guys are Sports Lunatics. This is the Sports Lunatics Show.
Welcome to another edition of the Sports Lunatics. Who are the Sports Lunatics? Well, we're just two regular guys who love sports history. Hi, I'm Shawn Lavigne in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
And I'm Howie Mooney in Ottawa, Ontario.
And you are watching or listening to the Sports Lunatics on YouTube at Sports Lunatics, listening to us on your favorite audio platform, and please check us out at thesportslunatics.com. Well, Howie, we are just a few hours as we record this from the announcement of the class of 2025 for the Hockey Hall of Fame. Your instant reaction?
Well, I mean, there's always happiness for the people that got in, some more than others. There's disappointment for people that didn't get in, like Carey Price, but he'll have lots of opportunities in the future to get in. I don't doubt that he will be in at some point. Not getting in today, it's there's a little bit of pain from that for me as a Habs fan and for as a Carey Price fan. But I think that overall, it's hard to argue with the guys that are in. It really is.
A couple of weeks ago, Howie, we did sort of preview what the potential class could be. Carey Price was high on a lot of people's lists, but we have also highlighted now for a couple of years why Alexander Mogilny was left out of the Hockey Hall of Fame. And finally, today, Ron Francis of the Hockey Hall of Fame announced his induction.
Alexander Mogilny made his NHL debut on October 5th, 1989 with the Buffalo Sabres, where he led the team in scoring in the 94-95 season. He later played 5 seasons for the Vancouver Canucks before being traded to the New Jersey Devils on March 14, 2000, winning the Stanley Cup that season. Internationally, Alexander is a member of the IHF Triple Gold Club, winning a World Championship in 1989 and a gold medal at the 1988 Olympics, in addition to a Stanley Cup win. The Hall of Fame is pleased to welcome Alexander Mogilny as an honored member.
I'm very happy that Alexander Mogilny is in the Hall of Fame now. And if you look up here, my second book, More Crazy Days and Wild Nights, there is a long essay in there about how the Buffalo Sabres managed to get him away from Red Army. That was you remember at the time, in the late 80s, early 90s, there were no NHL players in that were from Russia in the league. And there were 2 Russian speakers that were in the NHL, Viktor Nikhaev and Sergei Pryakin, but neither of those guys were really any headliners that would come out of the Soviet Union. Nikhaev was a Russian-born hockey player who married an American woman and was actually an American citizen. And Pryakin, of course, was a guy who had played against Canada in some capacities in his time as a player with the Soviets, but not really a guy who was going to make any mark, at least on the Soviet system coming to Canada. He wasn't going to leave any pain losing him. So when the Buffalo Sabres surprised everybody by drafting Mogilny out of junior, everybody thought, are you crazy? You're never going to have him. He's never going to come. But Jerry Meehan and the Buffalo Sabres brain trust at the time sensed that perhaps some political winds may be shifting, and that perhaps players from the Soviet Union might become available sooner rather than later. And of course, not very long after that, the Soviet Union fell. The Soviet flag was lowered for the last time, and the Russian flag was raised. And it was interesting too, because after the Sabres selected Mogilny, you saw other teams say, maybe we'll, you had the New Jersey Devils take Fedosov and I think Kasatonov. You had certain other teams as well drafting big named Soviet players at the time. But it was the story of how Meehan and Don Luce got Mogilny away from Red Army and the Soviet hockey system. That was really the most intriguing part of it. And that's the part that I cataloged in my book, Crazy Days and More Crazy Days and Wild Nights. They were playing in the World Championships. They were in Stockholm, Sweden. The place was full of KGB at the time. The place was also really, really, in terms of the Soviet team, clamped down so that no players could leave. But they managed to get him away. They had to change hotel rooms every few hours, basically, because they felt like they were being tracked by not just the KGB, but other police. The Swedish police at the time too were tipped off that the player had been quote unquote kidnapped by these Americans. And it's the story of how they were basically racing around the countryside outside of Stockholm, waiting for the contract negotiations to be done, waiting for the government in the United States to be able to grant Mogilny asylum. And then once they had all that, they could get a plane, and then they had to get on the plane at a certain time where they wouldn't be seen. They had to get also papers that allowed Mogilny to enter the U.S. It was all cloak and dagger stuff, and they had to do it under the dark of night, basically, and without the possibility or the calamity of being seen by KGB people or being apprehended by the police. So stories were getting out in the Swedish papers that Mogilny was quote unquote kidnapped, was missing, they were trying to spirit him away. And even years later, there was a guy from Buffalo who was representing the United States at a meeting, an international meeting in Europe. And when he introduced himself to a Russian and said that he was from Buffalo, the Russian guy said, "Oh, you're the ones who stole Mogilny." And so that always kind of left a thorn in the side of the Russians, even after the Soviet Union collapsed.
Fascinating career, wins a Stanley Cup.
Yeah.
Wins a gold medal at the Olympics, wins a world championship, wins World Juniors. And I said this many times when we talked about Mogilny. If that was a Canadian player that had all those accomplishments, they would be in within 2 or 3 years of their eligibility. He had to wait from 2009 to today to get into the Hockey Hall of Fame. No one, seemed to understand why. Sometimes obviously there are strong classes that we have seen, but even in the weaker classes that a lot of people, and I'm not saying you and me, I'm saying the hockey universe, he just couldn't get in. Last year being a prime example where everybody thought that was the year. And then when he did not get in, then more and more questions were being asked. And it made the Hall of Fame look bad, really bad, the longer he was kept out.
Yeah, I agree. I found a piece in NHL.com today. This is pre-announcement for the Hall of Fame. And, he talks about played, for Buffalo from 89 to 95, Vancouver from 95 to 2000, the Devils 2000 and 2001, the Leafs 01 to 04, and then back with the Devils again 05, 06. Won the Stanley Cup with the Devils in 2000, as you said, 1,032 points, including 473 goals in less than 1,000 NHL games, 990 NHL games. He was an electrifying player to watch. And I mean, he won the gold medal, as you said, with the Soviets in 1988 as well. And they compared him, Dan Rosen compared him in his article to Paul Kariya, which I found was interesting because I always found Mogilny to be much more, I guess, electrifying and much more compelling to watch than Paul Kariya, as good as Paul Kariya was.
I totally agree with you. If you watch the highlight reel, especially the year he scores 76 goals with Buffalo, just how amazing that year was to watch him. And he was on your highlights every single night for that accomplishment. And that just seems, there are certain records, there are certain accomplishments that get lost in the ether. It is 76 goals, and it never really gets talked about until this time of year when we're talking about Mogilny for the Hall of Fame. It's remarkable how people seem to have forgotten how special that year was.
It was special. I mean, but his career was special, and you could tell, even in junior, watching the World Junior Championships in '88, how special he was, and that line was. I mean, it was a treat to watch. I can remember playing hockey. We'd play in the evening. We'd go to upstairs to the bar in the arena, or we'd go to a different place. And on the TVs were the World Juniors. I believe, where was it? Not the one in Alaska? Was it the one in Alaska, or was it the one in North Dakota? Anyway, I thought it was in the States somewhere, but in a Western time zone, and because the games were on later for us than they would have been if they had been playing, say, here or in Europe. But anyway, just watching that line play, it was like NHL players playing against juniors. That's what it was like watching those guys play.
We got to move along, Howie.
Yeah.
3 first-time players who were eligible got into the Hockey Hall of Fame. Zdeno Chara, Joe Thornton, and Duncan Keith. All 3 we discussed heading in, when we previewed who could get in. It seemed like Joe Thornton might have been that borderline player out of everybody. Like, as you said, Carey Price did not get in, and we'll talk about some omissions later. But Zdeno Chara and Duncan Keith seemed to be slam dunks going into the Hall of Fame voting.
I thought so. I thought so too. And we can't talk about Zdeno Chara being from Ottawa or the Ottawa area without talking about the whole situation that existed in Ottawa in 2006 with the impending free agency of Wade Redden and Zdeno Chara, and the cap at the time going up from $39 million to $44 million, which today seems like peanuts, but at the time it was a big deal. Eugene Melnick, of course, was the owner. John Muckler was the GM in Ottawa. You had the 2 guys, Redden and Chara, both going to free agency. You had teams that were ready to grab them as soon as free agency hit if they did not re-sign in Ottawa. Edmonton wanted Wade Redden, and Chara was going to be picked up, according to Alan Panzeri, was going to be picked up by the Rangers. They wanted him. They were going to make him their second highest paid player behind Jaromir Jagr. And as I said, the Oilers were ready to give Wade Redden $6.25 million a season. That's incredible money at the time. But the team opted to go for Wade Redden, leaving Chara to be a free agent. And of course, then he signed with Boston, which I can see you shaking your head. I can see the disappointment on your face even today, almost 20 years later. And
it is the one move in Ottawa Senator history that, to me, changed the course of that franchise.
Yeah.
If he had signed and they had let Redden walk, the Ottawa Senators would have won at least one Stanley Cup. Now, they made it to the Stanley Cup final the following season.
Yes.
But then after that, it all changed.
Alan Panzeri in that article says that if they don't sign those two defensemen, they will be the St. Louis Blues of all the Canadian teams. And the St. Louis Blues at the time had just lost Chris Pronger the year before, and he ended up on Anaheim, the team that beat Ottawa in 2007. And so did with Niedermeyer as well.
Here's the thing that I remember from that season. Redden made the Olympic team. The Olympic team was not that great for Canada. They flamed out. And it just seemed like he was on the downside. Meanwhile, Chara was just, you could see him becoming the superstar that people had hoped for when they traded him and got him from the Islanders.
Yes. Well, Chara was one of those guys, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
that's okay.
You see there's a player curve that goes like this.
Yep.
And I'm drawing a parabola in the air with my finger here, or one side of a parabola. Chara, when Ottawa got him, was he was at 0.
Agreed.
And he was still a very unpolished stone. Playing in Ottawa and playing, under Jacques Martin, and I think Martin was still there. You could see the progress that Chara was making, and at the time of his free agency, he was just starting to go up, just starting to go like that on the upward part of that parabola. And what he became in Boston, the player that he became in Boston, if he had stayed in Ottawa, I agree with you, they would have won a Stanley Cup.
It hurts. It still hurts. I'm ecstatic he's in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Deserves it. But that move, and there was, it was, and I don't mean to take away from Wade Redden's career, because he did have a good career in Ottawa. But there was a lot of emotional attachments by the fans to Redden, as well as there was some personal stuff that happened in his life that happened right around that time as well. Ottawa did win a playoff round that year. Then they were upset by the Sabres. That's another one where it could have been what if, because it just felt like that. They were a really good hockey team, and unfortunately, it didn't happen for them. And they made the move. I was stunned that they did not keep Chara. It hurt, and then to go for 6.5, which in today's realm is not that much.
No.
But it was a big amount back then. And it cost the Senators, even though they were able to get to the Cup final the following season, in terms of the defense, what he could have done and how they could have built that team around him. We'll never know, obviously.
Well, the thing, too, is at that time, okay, as we were talking about that period of time in 2006, Edmonton had just lost Game 7 in the Stanley Cup final against Carolina. Pronger wanted out of Edmonton. And he ended up, as I said, going to Anaheim for draft picks. The day before, July 2nd, that was the day that Chara had signed in Boston. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Thanks for that history.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Well, it's funny because speaking of history,
yes.
Just a little break in all this. One of the guys who was eligible to go into the Hall of Fame today, Tuukka Rask, on this day in 2006, I think it was 2006, was traded by the Toronto Maple Leafs to the Boston Bruins for the 2004, I believe, Rookie of the Year, Andrew Raycroft. I'm doing all this off the top of my bald head, but that all happened on this date in 2006.
Crazy. Duncan Keith, 3 Stanley Cups with the Blackhawks, was the anchor of those teams, the glue. Him and Brent Seabrook, just a monster pair in Chicago. No-brainer going into the Hall of Fame. Your thoughts on Duncan Keith?
He was, as you said, with Seabrook, the anchor of that Chicago team that won the Stanley Cup in 2010, 2013, and 2015. And along with Jonathan Toews, who, our last show, I talked about Jonathan Toews a little bit, Captain Sirius. He won the Norris Trophy as the top defenseman twice, 09-10 and 13-14. You look at his production and his durability over that length of his career is spectacular. For his career, he averaged 24 minutes and 41 seconds a game. And for all the playoff games that he played with the Chicago Blackhawks, 27 minutes and 7 seconds for every playoff game averaged. Just incredible durability. And as we've said many times, and as other people have said many times, your best ability is your availability. And Duncan Keith was that.
Two-time Norris Trophy winner as the NHL's best defenseman in 2010 and 14, took home the Conn Smythe in 2015, and with Team Canada won 2 Olympic gold medals in 2010 and 2014, was also part of the list of the NHL Centennial season 2017 of the top 100 players in the game. Joe Thornton. Happy to see him in. I think he's a fan favorite. A lot of people really like Joe Thornton. And like we said, it seemed like this year it might have been Thornton or Price on the outside looking in. Joe Thornton inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame.
My first memory of Joe Thornton was him playing with the Bruins. Him not playing with the Bruins at the beginning of his career, doing a lot of sitting in the press box and the angst, the public angst that was around that. He was a high profile selection for the Bruins at the beginning of his coming out of his career. And he did a lot of sitting at the beginning. And it seemed like the Bruins didn't really know what to do with Joe Thornton at the beginning of his career. As you said, he ended up going from the Bruins to San Jose in 2005, and that's really where he made his name and made his mark.
I'll never forget that night because I was working and that trade came down, and it was a shocker. As you said, they didn't really know how to use him in Boston, but he still had the talent. You can see that he was still a superstar in the making. But that night especially, that was a shocking trade that happened late. I remember I was doing the night shift, and I'll never forget that when it came down.
I can remember being in the bowels of the arena in Ottawa when Boston was in town, and we asked questions about Joe Thornton. Why, what's going on with him? And I think I spoke to Johnny Busick and interviewed him, and he didn't really want to talk about it. But yeah, it was like you said, and the Bruins didn't seem to know how they wanted to use him. And I think it had to be a source of frustration, because I'm sure every city they went to, they were asked questions about Joe Thornton. Why isn't Joe Thornton playing? What's going on with him? And I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in your station, in your studios that night that trade went down.
And I believe Marco Sturm was part of that deal, and he is now the head coach of the Boston Bruins.
Interesting.
I'm pretty sure he was part of that deal. What can you say about Thornton? Obviously, he holds a lot of San Jose Shark team records, but of course, he's well known for being one of the most decorated players with Team Canada, winning a World Junior Championship in '97, World Cup of Hockey twice, 2004, 2016, Olympic gold in 2010, and again, MVP of the league, 6-time All-Star, and scoring champion in 2006, and made Jonathan Chichu a household name that year as he scores 56 goals, right? And Thornton, of course, came to Toronto. Too much hoopla at the time. Him and Marlowe did not work out, but we got to see him regularly, obviously, and just one of the good guys of the game. And Joe Thornton is, I forgot about this. He ended his career in Florida with the Panthers in 21 and 22. Played 1,700 games, Howie, had 1,539 points, and he had 1,109 assists. Pretty remarkable.
When you said Florida, I had forgotten that he played with Florida. I mean, I'm sure everybody else did too, but when I thought of Joe Thornton today, I also thought of Patrick Marleau, because those two guys on that San Jose team were pretty much inseparable, and you couldn't think of one without the other when you thought about those days in San Jose. And of course, when Patrick Marleau came to Toronto, he became like the dad to Austin Matthews and to Mitch Marner, and tried to pass on all of the wisdom that he had accumulated in his years in the league, and give it to those new guys.
It's pretty fascinating. There's been a lot of talk, various shows and articles I read where there are people questioning whether or not Patrick Marleau will get into the Hall of Fame. And I find that hard to believe based on, yes, he never won cups, but his level of consistency and endurance over the course of his career, I find that hard to believe that he will not get in the near future.
Well, when you said that, the first thing I thought of was how old were these people that are saying that? Because I feel like we live in a world that is dominated by what happened today and yesterday, not what happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
So true.
I mean, that's what we're here to do. Is we're here to talk about history. We're here to talk about what happened in the golden days, and not even, maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. It's important. You can't talk about what happens today without talking about what happened, 10, 15, 20, 40, 50 years ago.
So that does it for the NHL players that went in. Jennifer Bonnerill, who, of course, you see on CBC's Hockey Night in Canada, she joins the illustrious hall along with Brianna Decker in the player category. And Bonnerill, part of so many memorable moments for Canada. She won 3 gold medals for Canada in 2002, 2006, 2010, 5 world championships, and won 2 tournament MVPs. She won the Patty Kazmaier Award as the top female player in women's NCAA Division I hockey for 2 straight seasons with Harvard, and remains the only player to win the award twice.
I think of Jennifer Bonnerill. I think especially of that 2010 Olympics, when the emotions were so high, just incredibly high. It made for must-see TV, watching those two teams play in the gold medal match. And I can remember being at work and a friend of mine and I going off to a restaurant where we could watch the game on TV and have lunch, because we were both working split shifts at the time. And so we had the ability to do that, and sitting there and just the excitement and the tension between those two countries in that Olympics final. It just always comes back to me, and I love when there is that, because it makes everything more exciting when there is some tension, when there is some electricity between the two teams.
Brianna Decker helped the U.S. to an Olympic gold medal in 2018 and won 6 world championships. She too won the Patty Kazmaier Award, recording 82 points in 40 games during her junior season. She won the Clarkson Cup in 2015 with the Boston Blades, and the Isabel Cup in 2016 with the Boston Pride of the NWHL. In the builder category, Jack Parker, the longtime head coach of the Boston University Terriers, was at the helm for over 40 years, Howie, a remarkable career. I remember Jack appearing on NHL radio when I was doing the morning show with Scott Laughlin several times. Might have been one of the first coaches that we ever had on our station when we launched in 2005. Just a wonderful wealth of knowledge. Led Boston University to 3 NCAA titles in 78, 95, and 2009, and has won 897 games during his illustrious career.
He, as you said, a tremendous career, absolutely Hall of Fame worthy career, especially, 40 years in the same place and creating and molding these players year after year after year. And you think about the success that his school had over the course of all of that time. and they're a force even today. Absolutely Hall of Fame worthy.
Well, he did win 3, and that would be the Spencer Penrose Award as the top coach in NCAA hockey in 75, 78, and 2009. Finally, history, Howie. Danielle Sauvageau enters the Hockey Hall of Fame as the first woman to be inducted in the Builders category. She coached Canada to an Olympic gold medal in 2002 in Salt Lake City, which was incredibly memorable, and was the first Canadian team to win Olympic gold in 50 years. She also won a silver at the 1998 Winter Games in Nagano.
I can remember 1990 when the inaugural Women's World Hockey Championship took place in Ottawa at the Civic Center, what is now called TD Place. I keep having to remember that we have new names for things in Ottawa. I've been gone for 25 years now, so I have to, please excuse me for calling it the Civic Center. I will always know it as the Civic Center. But I remember in 1990 going to see the Canadian women win the gold medal against the USA in that game, that gold medal game. Danielle Sauvageau was a player then. We're talking 35 years ago, and it feels like it was the other day, but that was when they wore the now famous pink uniforms, pink pants, pink jerseys. But we had great seats. I remember we were sitting probably about 10, 12 rows up in one end. You're low enough that you can appreciate the speed, but you're still high enough that you can see everything kind of form, all the plays as they formulate. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful moment to watch them win the first gold medal at 1990. And I just think of how women's hockey has grown from that moment to the way it is today. Even at that time, 1990, seeing women playing hockey, there was a little bit it was a little different then. Today it's far more commonplace to see women playing hockey, girls playing hockey, than it was when I was younger, and even at that time in 1990. So to see the women excel the way they did, and to see the women's game grow the way it has to be tremendously gratifying. And as she is being put into the Hall of Fame as a builder, a tremendous career for Danielle Sauvageau. And we're going to see a lot more of the American women and the Canadian women that we've watched over the past 35 years, 40 years, become enshrined in the Hockey Hall of Fame the way that these pioneer women are now.
Howie, I will say this, and we used to get a lot of players on various shows, especially in the local market of Toronto at the time. And sadly, and I'll be transparent, not that we dealt with it like fluff, but it just seemed like it was the same questions over and over again. And I always felt bad for these women because they were really showcased, twice a year maybe?
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet they had leagues that, unfortunately, and I went to games where it was very sparsely attended. It wasn't, there wasn't a lot of money. They did it for the love of the game. And, they really weren't given the respect in the media as they are, I think, today, or it certainly is much better in terms of exposure that the women's league and the women's national teams are getting. But back then, 30 years ago, Howie, you really only heard about them when they were going into an Olympics, a World Championships. So you're talking maybe a 2 or 3 month period, if that. And I felt for these women because, and I will say this, they were incredibly nice. They likely took a lot of crap from a lot of outlets and individuals that may not have respected women's hockey, and they held their heads up high. And it is so great to see many of them not only being rewarded with a Hockey Hall of Fame induction, but just people are now being more aware of the history of women's hockey and these trailblazers. And not every single woman that played on the national team are going to get into the Hockey Hall of
No.
Fame, whether they're American or Canadian. But for the Trailblazers, who really put themselves out there for very little money, it is so nice that many of them are now starting to get recognized for all of their efforts. Because I saw it, I heard about it, and it is so nice to see a women's professional league finally. It has taken far too long for that to happen. But what's even greater is just to see the enthusiasm, to see how women's hockey, especially in Canada, and I'm sure it's the same in the United States. So just explode. And, they have their own heroes now. And it's so great to see.
This past spring in Ottawa, the Ottawa Charge made it to the PWHL final. And it was really, really cool to see so many young girls at the arena watching women who were their heroes now. And they were able to say, that could be me one day. And I think that's the most gratifying thing of all, is that these women or these girls now that are young have a chance to look up to somebody and maybe have something to shoot for.
And that's the perfect way to end this edition of the Sports Lunatics as we recap the 2025 Hockey Hall of Fame induction class. The 2025 Hall of Fame induction celebration, the ceremonies, take place on November 10th. You'll be able to watch it on TSN. I'm Shawn Lavigne in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
And I'm Howie Mooney in Ottawa, Ontario.
And you have been watching or listening to the Sports Lunatics. Check us out on YouTube, on your favorite audio platform, and please check us out at thesportslunatics.com. Give us a like, share with your friends and family, and have a great sports day.